the 150th day of class, and today is the introduction to Unit 6. And this time period takes place from 1945 to today. And we started class from a video from one of my heroes, Hans Rosling, and he passed away in 2017. And we watched his video, and I think it's remarkable how you can fit so much learning into 4 minutes. So here's the link to click on this. It's also on the Moodle page, and it's a perfect segue from the last unit into this unit, and it's 4 minutes worth your time. So if you missed class, please click on that so you can watch that. I'm not going to play it here because of copyright and whatnot, but please watch that when you get a chance. So our story ended last unit in 1945, and it's a pretty dark time. 50 million people are dead from World War II. Europe, Asia, North Africa is in ruin. World trade is damaged. It's pretty sad start. Now, the only country that came out of World War II smelling like a rose is the United States. And America's doing fine, but many European economies are in shambles. Their colonial empires are crumbling. There's these movements of nationalism in Africa and Asia. And again, the U.S. is the major industrial and atomic power. To think about that time where America had a weapon that nobody can defend, that's powerful. That doesn't happen too often in history. And the Cold War begins. And America and Russia, they were allies during World War II, but then it became sour grapes very, very quickly. The U.S. rebuilt Europe with the Marshall Plan, and I think Stalin wanted to do the same thing with Russia, but we one-upped him, if you look at it that way. And two philosophical differences. Capitalism, democracy does not blend with communism. They are two diametrically different ways of thinking things. So what happened is we get this policy of containment. Essentially, don't cross this line. You know, communism can go to this point. If you go any further, we have a problem. And an iron curtain descended upon the world. Now, the iron curtain is here across Eastern Europe, and you can see the world was divided in two. This is the world of my youth. We have the capitalistic, democratic blue versus the communist red, and the world was split in a very, very tense world at that. And the philosophy that was permeating this Cold War is something called mutual assured destruction, MAD. And if you recall in class, I simulated having a loaded firearm with the safety off to one person's temple, and they have the gun on my temple. Now, it's illogical to commit suicide. So it rests upon this premise. I don't want to die, the other person doesn't want to die. But if I pull the trigger, the last thing on earth that person's going to do is pull the trigger. Therefore, I'd be committing suicide. So logically speaking, if I pull the trigger, I die. However, it's equally illogical to drop the gun. So in that analogy with the guns, it wasn't guns in the Cold War, it was nuclear weapons. Now, how many nuclear weapons did they create during this time? The U.S. and the USSR had enough nuclear bombs to destroy the world 400 times. Worldwide suicide, 400 times. That is a little bit mad. It's a little nutty to me. Even Globy is saying, wow, that's something. And the 40 years were tense. 45 years were tense. America spent 5.5 trillion with a T. Russia spent 3.5 trillion. Now, to give you a perspective of how much $1 trillion is, it's enough to give each American family $100,000. So if we could magically go back in time and take all that money that went to weapons and give it back to the people, can you imagine that check for $500,000 showing up? Shoot, that'd be a happy, happy day and a happy, happy economy. But that money's long gone, and America has a debt I don't think will ever pay off, and Russia went bankrupt. So there was a pretty heavy economic expense for the Cold War. But there was a human expense. Even though it was a Cold War, there were these proxy wars. And America and Russia wouldn't go toe-to-toe with each other. That's suicide. However, hot wars, if you will, real wars were fought fighting communism. And these were Korea, where 48,000 Americans died, and Vietnam, where over 58,000 Americans died. So over 100,000 American lives were lost in these proxy battles in the Cold War. So the Cold War wasn't just ideological. There was a heavy, heavy human toll as well. And during the Cold War, many former colonies became free. And I gave the analogy in class, once these countries became independent, they're kind of like a pretty new girl that show up in school. And, you know, the boys are trying to get their attention. So when a new country came onto the scene, The Russians wanted them to be a communist nation, and America wanted them to be a democratic nation. And there was a bit of courting and encouraging to be one way or the other. Maybe not the best analogy, but you get where I'm coming from. So former imperial colonies became free in India and Indonesia and Ghana, all over the place, all over the place. And in terms of the end of the Cold War, I've heard it from 1989 to 1992, which happened to be my high school years. But 89 is when the Berlin Wall came down. What a profound day. That is the biggest party I have ever seen in my life. And I went to Michigan State, and that is the biggest party. The fireworks and the singing and the dancing and the hugging. And as a kid, I didn't quite get it. In fact, some people became very emotional, but I only lived in the Cold War period for about 16 years. To be in the Cold War your entire life and the air raid sirens and getting under your desks and Cuban Missile Crisis, it was an alleviation of a ton of fear. So that was a very, very happy day. And in the end, once the Berlin Wall fell, democracy spread. Thank goodness. In 1920, there were 15 democratic nations on Earth. In modern times, 2/3 of the world have a democratic form of government. Communism, you lost. Democracy, you won. And thank goodness for that. And the downside of this, being a new colony, you were just starting off and you didn't have a lot of economic resources. Imperial powers took that from you. So the gap between rich and poor grew wider. And there's a term called third world. And third world was synonymous with poor. And this is dirt poor. I mean, no clothes, no house. I mean, this is poor on a scale most Americans can't process. And other people are living large like that. So the disparity between rich and poor became very, very high. Some good news is that life expectancy rose in a lot of places in the world. However, the richer the nation, the longer you live. The poorer the nation, oftentimes, the less you live. So there's a huge discrepancy in income, and there's a huge discrepancy in life expectancy. So the world really is divided in a couple different worlds. Also during this time, the population going through the roof. Now here's where I checked in a world of about 4 billion. Now, right about here, we're at 7.5 billion. If I live to be the average age of an American male, there should be 9.5 billion. And here's a question. What are we going to do to feed all these people? What are we going to do to find incomes for all these people? So that's a problem at this point that we need to address, and that's been going on. And some good things, supersonic jets, the space shuttle, satellites, cell phones, computers, they all went into the mix, and it's remarkable. I remember in elementary school, our school had one of these, and it was unbelievable. Now we have computers in our pockets, so speed of travel's gone up, communications have gone up, technology's gone up. I mean, do I even have to say this to the world you live in? And during this time, globalization comes out. And globalization is when you're connected to the whole world. You can get, back and forth across the world easily. You can mix with people easily. A lot more interaction and access. And take this little kid, the cap from Bangladesh and jeans from Malaysia. You buy your clothes, you buy your stuff. Oftentimes, it's a country far across the world that manufactured that. And more goods are being produced and bought than any time before. Just go to Amazon.com and you can see that firsthand. You know this. Globalization also spread ideas and values. I live in a world where I see people doing yoga all the time. That's Indian. People going out for sushi. That's Japanese. There's a term called weebs. I guess weebs are kids that are crazy in the Japanese animation. That's Tai Chi is Chinese, and there's McDonald's in Moscow. It spreads ideas and values, but it has a high human cost. And if you look at this statistic, now if you took the world and divided them into a fifth in terms of income, the richest 20% control about 83% of the world's wealth. That is a huge, huge discrepancy, and it's only going up. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Here's another thing. Corporations are becoming more wealthy than nations. Now, this is 2002 stats, a little while ago, but in 2002, if Walmart was a nation, it would be the 44th wealthiest nation on planet Earth. ExxonMobil this year made more than the Czech Republic. So we're seeing the rise of corporations that are hugely powerful and hugely influential. Some big multinational corporations have more wealth than nations. And here's the thing, how can we get products so cheaply? oftentimes is at the back of sweatshops and child labor. They estimate 212 million children are going to work instead of going to school. And I know people complain about school. Oh, I have to write an essay and get up early, this, that, and the other thing. You know what? You work 6 days a week picking coffee beans for $3 a week. You'll be glad to write that essay. You'll be glad to do that math assignment because you have access to education. These poor kids do not. And oftentimes that's the root of these very cheap items. Outsourcing. It's competitive right now. Outsourcing is when American companies will get employees and get information and to, by people from other nations. My brother works for Ford Motor Company. They're bringing people in from all over the world, or they're taking business and shipping it off to these countries. They're getting equal quality, if not better quality, for less price. I'll tell you, it's a competitive job market. I feel bad for young people. You have to compete against American workers and the world at large. It's part of globalization. And the speed of globalization is resulting in more pollution. Forests getting cut down, fossil fuels, all this waste, and it's resulting in severe environmental effects in terms of global warming and the potential melting of the Arctic ice caps. This presents a big problem. So globalization, has some good aspects. It also has some bad aspects. Some people don't like globalization. They question it. Here's the thing. If your free trade is destroying a U.S. farmer, if you're a U.S. farmer, yeah, it's this problem. Your rainforest got knocked down. You got people living in poverty. Your kid is forced to work, child labor. I don't think you're really digging globalization that much. And I want to leave you with this term cultural imperialism. Now, traditional imperialism, for the most part, is gone. We have international organizations that won't have that happen. So there's this notion of cultural imperialism where the products of the West are going to just be, thrown into a foreign nation, and that's how we're going to profit. And you can see this picture. There's McDonald's, and there's Microsoft, and there's Shell, and Texaco, and Disney. Mickey Mouse with the firearm kind of makes me smile inside. And, Coca-Cola is sold on 7 continents. It's the most recognized symbol on the planet. So this cultural imperialism, this West just dropping its products in the foreign markets, that's the name of the game. So hopefully you got the background, a little basics of information about the Cold War, decolonization, and democratization. And those are the things we're going to be learning about. So thank you for watching.